All right, we're back. Another episode of Jack of All Trades. Today's topic, we're going to discuss NFL draft and assessing some value to the players, and maybe take a look at each team. But just to get us started, there's the last pick of the draft, known as Mr. Irrelevant this year. In 2020, it was the New York Giants selecting Tay Crowder from Georgia. I mean, you look at the highlights, the guy might, who knows, maybe he's a Hall of Famer. We'll see. But whether a player adds value and it's a career practice squad guy or it's a Hall of Famer, at some point you'll value the guy. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some of the value of this year's draft, and we're going to start with the NFC East. Jack, we have your spreadsheet pulled up here. What are we looking at?
Yeah, so if you see the spreadsheet, there's your guy Tay Crowder, right? So he's at the bottom, and he wasn't that highly sought after, but he got drafted, and like you say, that shows a little bit of value in a draft pick, just in the way that after the draft goes by, then everybody signs free agents, right? There's all this free agency, undrafted free agency period, and I just listened to a show on the NFL Locked On NFL Draft, and at the end of every team, they talked about like who's the most likely guy to make the team as an undrafted free agent, and the thing that they learned about, that I learned about even more so, was that undrafted free agents make NFL rosters all the time. So not only does, like you said, Tay Crowder have a chance to make it, but people beyond the draft, beyond 255, Mr. Irrelevant, they have a good shot at. There will be a lot of guys. There might be 30 or 40 guys will make the team that make a team that weren't drafted. And a lot of guys like Adam Thielen, for our team, the Vikings, Adam Thielen and Anthony Harris are two of the best players on the team, they make together like $25 million this year, neither one drafted. So the fact, for me, it kind of says like the fact that even people beyond the draft can make it, then every single draft pick has value. And that's kind of what we get at with how we're going to look at it now, is just like where the value lines up per pick, and then what teams maybe maximize their value over other teams. So, that's kind of the gist of it, is of a draft for me, is value.
Sure. And you'd think, a lot of teams do it differently. Everybody has their strategy. Go get your guy, trade up, trade back. There's a lot of different ways you can play it, but it seems like the overall idea should be, well, let's go have a list of guys that we want. Let's find the best value and where to select them compared to what other teams are doing and what their needs are. There's a lot of chess match behind the scenes, I'm sure. But as far as the spreadsheet goes here, what are we looking at?
All right, so we talked about the Giants, so we'll start there. We're going to do the NFC East in this video, and then hopefully we'll string on one division at a time to break it down. But this will be the first one. So here I'm looking at the Giants, and what I do, and this is I just want to be simple. I want to see, like, did they get value? Did they get around value? Because it's hard to criticize too much if you're close to value. And then, or did they get some steals and they got great value? And then value with respect to like their draft order, and also value with just like net value or gross value, just how much better is this team going to get? Because if you got tons of draft picks, well, you got more chances of getting better, so that matters. And then I also like to look at, did the front office maximize their opportunities, or did they just get a bunch of value because they had it, because they had a lot of picks? Did they give away some players previous? So what I do here is, to the left of the team name here, this is just my little cheat sheet, but this is kind of expected value on their draft slot. So the Giants were a bad team last year. So the Giants picked early. The Giants picked 4th. Okay, so here's their, they picked 4th. And so for a team that's picking 4th, the expected value on this scale is 700. It's a 1,000-point scale based on some historical stuff, and there's a lot to look at in that. But we're just gonna use that scale for this exercise, and they get 779 total points for their entire draft. And for the Giants, I would say, they're first. And if you look at it, and all drafts are going to be like this, these higher picks have a ton of value because you're getting a crack at all these players that are out there. And so for an early pick like that, that's worth 499, they went out and got a guy that I would say is a bit of a reach. Still a great player, but a lot of people had him not so high. They had him as like the 11th best player consensus wise. And this consensus, sorry to jump around here, but
sure.
The consensus is basically a constructed from all the big boards of all the noted bloggers, the noted podcasters, YouTubers. But these are guys we'd call draft nicks. There's websites dedicated to draft. Pro Football Focus has their draft, estimate, and all these get put together to form a consensus. So there's a guy who writes for The Athletic named Arif Hassan. He puts together a consensus that I've used in the past. There's a guy, Steezo, at Steezo. He's a Vikings fan. He's a big draft guy. He sent me his consensus, and I use that for this year's, where they take together, 50 to 60 big boards, and they average them out and come up with a consensus. And in the past, and you can look at Arif's written articles in the past that compare how the consensus comes out to the actual draft, and it's been pretty good. So that's kind of an explanation of what consensus is. And we talked about it on the pre-show podcast, talking about this kind of why we assess value of the consensus to the value of the pick, and maybe going over some of the picks, we could see how you gain or lose value. And in this pick, the Giants lost a lot of value, but it's not so bad because they took the 11th best player of the draft with the 4th pick according to consensus. Well, it's still a really good player, but according to how trades are valued, like what it would cost to move up from 11, to move up from 11 to 4, that's kind of the opportunity the Giants missed out on had they captured it perfectly. So if they could have traded back to 11, they could have picked up 133 points, which is in the realm of like a second or third round draft pick.
Right. There's a lot of value right there. And you got to think there's a good chance they still get the same guy. And if not, you probably have a second guy on your list that should still be there. So I don't know. And like we're saying before, we don't know until 3-4 years down the road who's the man, right? Who's the guy who stands out. So it just seems to make sense that if you're going to approach a draft like this, you try to get as much value as you possibly can. Like we say, you get a free crack at a guy, right?
Right.
You don't get that guy, but you get two other guys that who knows if they make it or not, right? That's
right. Yeah, that's the idea, is that you don't know, and any front office that is drafted for a long time, their success rates trend towards NFL average. That's just that's just a fact. It's probability. It's like you go back to, there's 32 front offices, there's 32 scouting staffs. They're all looking at this stuff, and the idea that you are so much smarter than everybody else is crazy. So if it does, so it comes down to like, have you assessed the market as well? And so it's not always like I said. So if you're taking the 11th guy with the 4th pick, I can't get too crazy about that. I object more to taking like a lower value position in the 2nd round when the guy's considered a 4th rounder by everybody, where you could probably trade back. But so the Giants could have gambled, and I think it would have been smart for the Giants to gamble, to try to trade back. And then the other conversation is there isn't always someone willing to give you that value. So I don't come as much as this one negative 133 looks bad. I don't grade it so poorly if I'm just looking at it. I'm like, oh, the Giants are terrible. They made up for it right off the bat with their second pick, and I don't want to go through every pick, but you can see they kind of made up through it. So when I go down, if I want to look at a team's draft, I'll just go down to the bottom here where I aggregate their value made or lost, and to give up 24 or 66 points, depending on which consensus you use, that's not much for 746 points of value. Now they made some trades here that lost off 779, but even then, if I look at this expected 779 and I get 722, that's pretty close. I would just say it's an average value draft for their expected value. But if you just look around the league, they got a pretty big haul of value. There's teams with 400. Seattle got 150. That's insanely terrible. Green Bay 230. Awful. Yeah. So it's
sure
their haul. I would say the Giants. Oh, they got a pretty big haul, and they kept it around value. Enough said.
Okay, yeah. So that's how we break this down. We started with the New York Giants. Let's continue with the NFC East. Who's next on your list here?
Let's whoever we want to go to. Let's go to Dallas. Everybody's into Dallas.
Yeah. Dak Prescott.
So as I scroll around this sheet, I don't have a very particular order. This goes back a few years when I created this this method. So Dallas, from their draft slot, they had 500 points of value. This is how I look at it. And then where they actually took their selections is in here, and that's about 500 points where they drafted. So they didn't move around a lot. And then Dallas, of course, not of course, but they got an extreme amount of extra value. So you go up for their picks, first, second, third pick, they got fantastic value to the consensus board. And even late, they picked up some guys that fell, that were sleepers. So, these were fantastic picks. And just quickly, the big one they got was their first pick was the receiver. Where are we at here? Dallas. Why am I not seeing them? There they are. Sorry. CeeDee Lamb, from Oklahoma. Consensus-wise, he was the number 10 pick on a consensus board. High-value position receiver. It's just a great pick, in my opinion. Then they get Trayvon Diggs, high-value corner, rated as a late first rounder, and they get him with the 51st pick. So that for Dallas, you can't ask for much more. I mean, it's just a fantastic draft. Sorry, I'm scrolling. I forgot where Dallas was on my board.
Got a lot of they got a lot of value out of those guys. Those guys look like they're going to be long-term career type guys in the NFL. Dallas doing a good job with their the amount of picks they had. Let's go take a look at Philadelphia. See, try to get some weapons for Carson Wentz over there, and how'd they perform according to your analysis here, Philly?
Well, they went with a receiver in the first round, and it was a high-value pick, Jalen Reagor. I mean, this was a guy that the consensus had a little bit lower, so they took a little heat on the value. They took a big amount of heat, but I think most people think for what they wanted as a speed receiver, you get into details, and they like it and they talk their way into it. But I have to disagree. That I know they took high value picks, receiver and quarterback, and that helps, but to their first three picks were all negative value. They in total they gave away 150, 190 points of value. Their second pick was a backup quarterback. So long term, there's what I like to speak to some convexity where there's a big payoff possibility 3-4 years down the road. I can't overlook the fact that they gave away a lot of value to the consensus. Their number is really low of their haul of 273 for an expected 450. I don't like it. I mean, you can talk your way into anything. position fit and all this stuff after the draft. But I like to stay consistent. I look at value, and I would just say it was a sub-value draft.
Yeah, certainly throwing out a negative number there doesn't look all that good for the Philadelphia Eagles. Washington Redskins, a lot of team needs. I think they had 7 picks or so, something like that. How
Yeah.
did they fare here?
So they had 1,000 points of value because they were picking second. So you get a whale of points in that. The number 2 pick's worth a ton. And they went out and they picked the number 2 consensus guy, just boom, boom, and they just pocketed 717 points of value on this scale, which is great. And I think if you think about the football side, it's an edge rusher. It's a great player that they're happy about. And then all their other picks, they didn't get a second round pick, but then all their other picks added up to not very many more points. They only get another 150 points. But like we said, Mr. Relevant's only worth 1 point, and it's a chip, chair, and a chance for a guy like that. So, they went to some positions of need. They got a little negative on it, but the negative 50 out of 860, not gonna sweat it. They still had a pretty big haul, which their 800 points is similar to Dallas's 800 points. Granted, they were coming from a position of a better draft position. So, efficiency wise, they didn't get as much value, but they got, they grossed a lot of value, and that should make Washington a better team. Even if it's just in Chase Young being a superstar edge rusher, that'll make your team better.
Yeah, Chase Young is certainly a dynamic player. I can't wait to see what he does in the NFL. Should be a lot of excitement around him. He's going to be disruptive for sure. But real quick, so you have 717 for that pick, Chase Young. So therefore, the 0 right next to it in the column to the right, that's exactly what he's worth. So you come up with the 0 there.
Right. So he was the consensus number 2 pick, and they got him at number 2. That's just straight value for value. So they didn't overachieve. They didn't underachieve. It's hard to overachieve your second pick. You'd have to get Joe Burrow since he was the first guy. But yes, since they got the number 2 guy with the number 2 pick, it's 0 added or subtracted value, but you get the value. That's the value you got. And that's why, this 800 final number, 821 final number, the bulk of it is in Chase Young. But I do like the idea they got, 6, 7 other players. Those are 7 other, quote, lottery tickets of varying degrees of value.
Well, there you go. A lot of information. That's a hell of a spreadsheet you got there, Jack. Nice work on the spreadsheet. That's a nice way to break it down. Thanks for sharing it with us. And that concludes our NFC East draft analysis. Be sure to go over to the podcast. Just look for the logo. We did a little pregame, little behind-the-scenes look at what we set up our YouTube channel session, what it's going to be. There is a little bit of method to the madness, if you will. So be sure to look that up. And then thanks for joining us. And be sure to tune in next time on Jack of All Trades.